next week. Lots of suggestions the government aren't properly involved in negotiations. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let's get the view from the other side of the chamber now. Michael Fabricant is the Conservative MP for Lichfield and delightfully dressed in his sunglasses on a very sunny day down here in Westminster. Michael, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's start first of all with Rwanda. I mean, what do you think of yesterday? I mean, it was somewhat of a mess in the sense that, irrespective of what you think of the plan, that a chartered plane costing £500,000 was going to potentially take off with one passenger on board.
Yeah, well, in fact, it was going to be 4 passengers, and then, as you say, it became 1, and then it didn't come any. So it certainly cost the taxpayer money, there's no question of that. That was an interim judgment made by the European Court of Human Rights. Worth reminding again and again and again, this has absolutely nothing to do with the European Union. That's the European
Court of Justice.
This is the European Court of Human Rights, which is in The Hague and not in Strasbourg. But even so, an interim judge hearing an application late at night said there should be a halt to it temporarily.
Of course, the European Court of Justice, European Court of Human Rights does protect a whole series of rights in this country. You know, the right to go on strike, but the right to be protected against domestic violence, the right to free speech and all that sort of stuff. They are some of the bedrocks, actually, of our democracy.
Well, and indeed it was our democracy which set it up in the first place.
Yeah.
It was Winston Churchill who set it up with the conquered powers, France and Germany. France had been conquered, of course, by Germany, in order to ensure that European justice would be to British standards.
So wouldn't it be unthinkable in some ways for Britain to withdraw, which Downing Street don't seem to be ruling out this afternoon?
Yeah, I don't think Britain's going to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights.
So you think the government should rule that out?
Well, I'm not going to commit them to anything because I'm a politician, but I don't think we were doing it. I don't think that's even being discussed. Hang on.
The Downing Street spokesperson was asked about this.
Well, maybe he was confused.
Well, they said all options remain on the table. So you think the government shouldn't go down that path?
I don't think government is going to go down that plan. And you know what? If I was a government spokesman, if I was doing your job but being employed by 10 Downing Street instead of being employed by GB News, I'd say everything is on the table and nothing's being ruled out. It's what they say. But we're not going to leave. But what we might well do, and what indeed David Cameron was going to do when in 2005 he wrote the Conservative Party manifesto, and again it was in our manifesto again some 3 years ago, is to look at the Human Rights Act. Now, for some 40 years, Britain was a member of the European Court of Human Rights, and then Tony Blair came along and thought, oh, what a good idea, we should now make an Act of Parliament. As soon as you make an Act of Parliament, it becomes completely inflexible. The joy of English law over Napoleonic law is that it's flexible. And you start putting down legislation, then it becomes less flexible. And that's what's happened here. So in 1998, it may or may not have been a good thing to do. 40 years onwards, no.
Let's talk about the plans themselves, though. 440 people arrived across the channel yesterday, the highest number for a couple of months. Clearly, at least the message isn't acting as a deterrent, which seems to be the main reasoning for this.
Because they don't think it'll work.
Well,
so we've got to prove it's going to work.
Well, precisely. So at what stage do we start to judge it is working? If by the end of the year the number's substantially bigger than last year, is that a sign it's not working? When do we start to judge that this Rwanda plan is working?
I would say I would be getting worried if after 6 months, when it is working, in the sense that we're actually sending people to Rwanda, if people are still coming across, then I'd be saying, well, it's not working too well. But at the moment, people are coming across because they're saying, you know what? There are some clever lawyers around, and even when the Supreme Court and the High Court and the Court of Appeal all say, actually, it's not illegal, and then some bright spark in Doughty Chambers goes along and manages to persuade a judge who's half asleep to come up with an interim ruling late at night, which is what he did over in The Hague, then when we get round that problem, and to do that, as I say, we're going to have to amend the Human Rights Act. When we get round that problem, if after 6 months of it working, i.e. we are sending people to Rwanda, but people are still coming across the English Channel, we'll know it's not a deterrent. But it's certainly no deterrent now, because they all think they can get away with it.
OK, well, we'll see. We'll get you back here in the snow later on this year to determine whether it is working or not. As always, Michael Fabricant, thank you very much indeed for joining us here outside Parliament on College Green. Not just, of course, the Rwanda plan